Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'd like to wish you all a happy new year 2023 and welcome you to the very first webinar of the year. Our topic is Indigenous Student Voices, the TRC, and Decolonizing our Curricula. First, before we begin, we'll do a land acknowledgement. I'm going to just briefly introduce myself too. I'm Dr. Alana Butler. I'm an assistant professor in the Faculty of Education at Queen's University, and I'm a co-organizer along with Dr. Isel Yoon and Dr. Kathleen Hilliard. The land acknowledgement. So while we meet here on a virtual platform, we should take a moment to recognize the importance of the land on which we are located. We acknowledge the territory to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in building positive relationships between nations and in developing a deep understanding of Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all Inuit, First Nations, and Métis peoples. We invite you to learn more about the territory on which you reside. Just click in the URL https://nativeland.ca. So to engage in the conversation, we will have our questions at the end. So after the presenters, each person has presented, we have a 30-minute period allocated at the end for questions. So we have closed captioning that's available, that's accessible as a live transcript. Do save your questions for the end. You should use the Q&A feature for the questions, and we will address the individual questions after the discussion. So your name and question will be visible to all the attendees, and you can upvote. So at any point, you actually have the ability to upvote to place a question at the top of the list. To do this, you need to scroll your cursor. Scroll your cursor up. Okay, so for today's presentations, which we are very excited about, our first presenter is Dr. Emily Milne from MacEwan University. Emily Milne is an associate professor in the Department of Sociology at MacEwan and will be presenting on amplifying Indigenous student voices in educational contexts. Welcome, Emily.
Hello, thank you. So I will share my screen. Wonderful. There we go. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and be part of this session today. Thank you again for having me. So I just wanted to start off by saying that I am presenting today. I want to acknowledge that here, where I'm presenting, is on Treaty 6 territory. So that's the location of where I'm presenting from, but also where this project, or the two projects that I'm sharing with you today, where they were conducted. And the work that I do with Indigenous communities, the partners I work with, the work that we do aims to really engage community members, students, family members, educators to come together in a meaningful way. Part of that is honoring and respecting histories, languages, ceremonies, cultures of the Indigenous peoples who call this territory home, and the people that I work with as well. And I'm very grateful to have the relationships and partnerships and engage in the projects that I do. And so this presentation specifically, so I'm going to be sharing about two projects that I think they're great because I was involved in them. I think I'm a bit biased there. I think all my projects are wonderful, but I think I think they're great projects. I'm sharing about these two projects today. And then I'll be talking about kind of cross-cutting themes across both of them and also key learnings. I wanted to share about some projects I'm involved in, but also talk about kind of how I do the work I do, how I go about doing this work in a meaningful and respectful way, because I feel like that is also really meaningful and part of the process of the work that I'm involved in. And so the one project is involving 41 Indigenous students through Photo Voice, and the second project involves focus groups with 36 Indigenous students that I'm working with. And the Photo Voice project, I'm hoping that our session gets accepted at CSA as well. I'm working with Terry Wotherspoon on these projects, and hopefully we'll be able to share more about the Photo Voice project at the CSAs as well if our presentation is accepted. And so, yes, that's an overview. So first, before I get started, I just wanted to kind of give a bit of, I guess, kind of position myself in this work. And so for myself, I'm an applied sociologist, a community engaged researcher. And so I use theory and research methods to engage with social issues, contribute to public understanding and discourse. But my main goal is to co-create solutions to address issues in partnership with community partners. And so that means that I listen, I learn, I spend time building those connections and relationships. One project I'll be presenting on today, I volunteered in the school for a year. In a class. And then once we had that relationship built, it was the administrator who came forward and asked me to kind of come on board with different projects. How can we work together? So I do find that by spending time listening, learning, volunteering, making those connections and building those relationships in a good way, that my projects I'm involved in have emerged naturally from those relationships. And so the projects I'm sharing today and all the projects I'm involved in are ones that I've been asked to be part of. And so I've been asked to sit at the table to engage in these projects. And again, people have approached me, invited me to be part of them, but these projects have emerged naturally from the relationships that I had built. So I'm a long-standing non-Indigenous ally of European ancestry. And again, I live in Treaty 6 territory. And the work that I'm sharing today is I don't know why I ended up talking about pizza or pie a lot when I'm talking about the projects I do, but I feel like I'm kind of one piece in this broader project, one piece of the pie, or I think I was at one session the other day starting talking about the pepperoni on the pizza. So I'm kind of one piece of this bigger group of people coming together to share their experiences, perspectives, and ideas to make these projects move forward. So I'm the one who's here sharing and talking today, but I'm certainly not the only one who's been part of these projects. I'm one piece, one person, part of teams of people who have come together to have these projects unfold the way that they do. And importantly, Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers and Indigenous liaison workers, educators, parents, and students have all been engaged in these projects and directing and guiding how they unfold in a meaningful and respectful way. So the presentation today, I thought it might be helpful just to kind of frame some context around, the significance of this. Like the who cares question, I think, is an important one to bring up and answer. I want you to know the projects are meaningful because they're meaningful to me and the community partners I work with, but also I wanted just to share that broader context of the significance of this work. So supporting Indigenous students and including Indigenous perspectives and experiences in education are priority areas in Canadian education policy and practice. And both projects I'm sharing today are framed in relation to the TRC calls to action to incorporate knowledge about Indigenous cultures, histories, experiences throughout curricula and schooling, and improving educational outcomes for Indigenous students, as well as even, having parents and caregivers at the table to support education. So student engagement is also associated with student attendance, high school completion, academic achievement, a sense of belonging to a school community. So there's many areas where student voice is significant and also, broader engagement. So, supporting Indigenous students, their education is a priority for sure. And then even here in Alberta, where I am, we even have teacher quality standards and things that do talk about creating opportunities for student voices, for family voices to be represented within schooling. So broader context. So the first project I wanted to share with you today, engaging students through photo voice. So here, this is the project that I was volunteering in the school for over a year, just building relationships. I find that that's kind of the best way for me to have a sense of, when I first moved here, for example, I just started volunteering in schools. I wanted to have those relationships, but also I'm from Ontario. When I came here in 2016, I just wanted to have a sense of, what's going on in the schools? What are some of the issues or the needs or the challenges or things that I could kind of contribute to or support? How could I be involved in a meaningful way? And then through those, engagements with schools, kind of getting into other schools and volunteering and making those connections, that was really important to me. And so through all that work, I ended up getting connected to this school again here, spent just the year volunteering there. And it was this project that came forward. And this project grew naturally from that, from the relationships that I built. So all my projects are community-based participatory research projects. So that means that I do them in partnership with community partners and bring people together in a meaningful way to engage in these projects together, where everybody has a voice and is sharing and guiding the work. And so with this project, it was one school that I worked with here. It's an Indigenous program of choice, and it has over 450 Indigenous students at the school. And so I was, crashing the Parent-Teacher Association meetings. I was invited. I didn't have a kid there, so I was just coming as the new friend and chatting with people, trying to understand how I could contribute. And that's how this idea came forward. And when Photo Voice came up, because parents are saying, oh, our kids are always taking photos, they're on their phones taking pictures and stuff. Photo Voice emerged from that. And I knew nothing about photography or anything. And so that's how I started learning. And so from that, this project emerged. And so the project here aims to engage and empower students as leaders and education partners using Photo Voice and focus groups. And so, yeah, this project took again, the amazing, I found working in partnership with community organizations and schools and organizations, as I mentioned, just, principals and teachers and students, I find elevates the projects I'm involved in and just take them to a whole another level than I could ever possibly imagine. And so this project, originally, I thought it was going to be like a week. And then it ended up being a class option that was offered every Thursday morning that I was co-teaching photography with the teacher there. So I had to learn real quick about photography. But it's actually now a permanent class that they have at the school. And we started this in 2019, went through the issues of COVID, but still, a class that I'm part of and engaged with. So Photo Voice, what is that? So Photo Voice is an approach that uses photography to empower individuals to share their voices and express their views using pictures and words to become actively involved in processes that affect them. It empowers individuals to share knowledge, represent their community, and identify issues that are important to them. It also creates a vehicle for voices of students to be heard in the context of schooling and offer meaningful opportunities for students to engage in schooling processes. And so I'll share a little bit about kind of how we went about doing this. Our processes is my next slide here. First of all, we started talking, engaging with the students, having conversations about kind of what's important to students about their schooling and their learning, the key themes that kind of kept coming up in our conversations. So really we were having circles with the kids and having discussions and just kind of opening up this conversation. And it kept coming back to themes of relationships, artwork, language, culture. These things kept coming up. And so that was interesting at the beginning to hear those, discussions of things that students were sharing. We had, sessions where we learned about photography and photo editing. Students were, they documenting, we sent them out with guiding question, which was what matters to me about my school, sent them out. And they were documenting things, taking pictures, journaling as well. And through that process, then the next stage was they picked 2 pictures or 2 photos at the end. So this took, several months for us to do this work. This is one cohort I'm going to be sharing with you today. It took several months for us to go out and do this work, but students were always journaling throughout and making notes and reflecting. And then at the end of the process, they ended up picking 2 photos that they felt best represented what was important and mattered to them about their education. And so the next slides I have, are about sharing some of their photos that they took. They ended up picking a name that they started calling themselves. And so they were calling themselves the Rise of 17. Originally we have 17 and the number grew from there. But they even were working on their artistic signatures because they were signing their photos, and because of FOIP and things like that, they couldn't have their real name. So I said, when you get older, no one can read your signature anyway. So they were creating these, interesting signatures that they could sign all the photos that they were giving away and things for our knowledge dissemination aspects that we built in. So we had a really good time. And this is the one report that we had, but I've continued working with them, still working with them now. We're getting ready to launch this again in a bit of a different way because they just love this idea of this project. But this is the first report and the first cohort that I'm sharing with you today. So this was, again, the first report we shared and had with the kids. And you can see that they, had took their pictures, they had captions, and they had titles. In this book, we just used their initials and the grade level that they were in. But you can see just from here, it's probably small on your screen, but some of the things that they were saying, and they really appreciated, being able to get out. They became, really embraced the whole process. So here's some other photos and things. This, for example, the top left, this is, title is the passage. This represents a path to me. It could be scary and dark, but you have to keep going and walking. When you get to an age, it gets hard, but you have to keep going forward to get to the light at the end. We all have light at the end of our paths. We just have to reach it. Like, these kids. Sometimes it's hard when you ask kids, how do you feel about this? Or, what's your experience with this? Sometimes when you're working with kids, it's hard to get them to just open up right away about these things. But when you give them a camera and send them off, I found that it was a really interesting process. They just opened up and shared and journaled about all these things, which was amazing. Traditional learnings there and things like that they captured with their pictures. Library pictures and things like that. There's always teepees around, so they took pictures of that. For example, top left, this is a photo. I portray a home to my ancestors. I want people to look at this photo and feel a sense of familiarity. When I look at this photo, I think of my family, and I hope the viewers feel the same. So things like that they were sharing. So I have another slide here for you. Just again, some examples of things that they shared. Top left. So the TP people, this is a picture that represents my culture and my school. I come to school to learn about my culture and how meaningful my culture is. My culture taught me how to show respect. I learn how much meaning in my life and my culture has. So I love these kids. So great opportunity. I learned a lot from them, and we walked together in that process where they were the researchers in that in those activities. And so engaging students through focus groups or circles. This is the second project I'll share with you today. So shifting here, so this was a project that was from 2018 to 20, and it again was a community-based participatory research project. Here exploring how student success is defined through the lens of Indigenous students in one central Alberta school division. Again, this project was in partnership with Indigenous, the Indigenous education unit at the school division, but also with the schools that I was working with. And so very meaningful overall for sure. And so findings promoted the knowledge and understanding about differences between how educational success are defined and approached by education systems in comparison with the ways in which it's perceived in particular community cultural contexts. And so here there was, 4 focus groups we did with Indigenous youth that were age 11 to 17, and there were 36 participants. And so really, research language aside, I find a lot of what I do is just changing the specific words or rephrasing things for different audiences so that the things I'm saying are accessible and understood from different audiences I work with. Research, a focus group, ethics, these, words are for things like, research ethics, for example, but really it's coming out and just having a conversation and sitting in a circle and discussing. Having a circle together and sitting is a meaningful experience for kids. They really benefited a lot. It was a very positive experience for everybody. But to get to this point of actually having to sit down together and have these conversations, we were engaged in, elders and knowledge keepers and educators as, who are connected to the schools, kind of designing the research together, doing the data collection together, ensuring that all the activities were meaningful, appropriate, and culturally responsive. And so that even goes to each school. We were, again, different schools here, but again, just working with people who are at the school saying, what would make the most sense here within this school community context for how this could unfold in the best way. And I do that with all my projects. I may know how to do something in a school around the corner from me, but working with different school communities. So who should be at the table? What are the protocols there? Well, how could we do this in a way that makes the most sense and is most respectful, appropriate way for the groups that we're sitting down and having conversations with. So that could be transportation, food, childcare, a class, and here we call it Aboriginal Studies, but the Indigenous Studies class, making gifts for parents and caregivers or students or whoever it is, right, more broadly with projects I'm involved in. But that, just idea of really engaging people at the school to shape what it looks like and how it can unfold. So lots of flexibility. So I'll just share some key themes here related to what was shared. So students did discuss academic accomplishments in relation to student success. So for example, succeeding academically for employment purposes and financial independence, succeeding academically to accomplish, for example, what family members or previous generations had not. Some students talking about breaking the cycle, not being a statistic, not fitting a stereotype, and to experience, wanting not to experience a stigma around not graduating. So those are things that were shared. However, academics was one small component of success. When asked to define student success, several students expressed that their definition was different from that of the educators. Where educators may think about grades, marks, academic achievement, and attendance, high school completion. Students voiced a frustration about what they saw as their personal values being assessed daily by standardized and impersonal measures. Many students focused on personal goals and values. Students spoke about success in terms relevant to their personal goals and values that I had mentioned, and found it beneficial to identify personal goals they were motivated to achieve, which allowed them to create paths for their own success and led to more purpose and meaning in their educational experience. And there's just some quotes here reflecting. I'll just read the third one. I'm a young Indigenous woman. The stigma is real. Like, I fall under so many stereotypes. It's not even a joke. Being successful for me would be teaching and showing my child, or just being Indigenous in a day-to-day, and being successful now is I've got to go to school and prove these people wrong. But that's just how it is to be Indigenous. So people talking about, I've got to, there's a stereotype where I need to overcome something, not be a stigma. So part of that was, built in or an aspect, right? Doing things differently than their family had done, for example. But recognizing that also it's very broad in terms of success beyond what schools tend to define as success. So here, another theme, balance and holistic support. So students spoke about education as a personal fulfillment and development, as well as the intrinsic value of experiences and knowledge gained through schooling, as well as happiness and well-being as a precursor for academic success. So here, I'll just read the third one. Success to me, I feel, is like a balance in life, just giving as much as you receive or even more. So, lots of, definitions here, but broader than just academic achievement was quite clear and came through over and over and over again. Competition and stress was something that came through. So students emphasized a shift from competitive or comparative model of success to one that was focused on self-concept, self-efficacy, relationships, connections, and contributions in the broader community. So saying, school, there's so much competition, we're, against each other. That's kind of the way it's set up versus kind of everybody supporting each other and moving forward together. And so people feeling lots of stress within kind of how things are currently set up. That was kind of a detriment to health and well-being. And they said that they really wanted to kind of advance themselves, feel more fulfilled with their own, goals and what they wanted to achieve in their own understanding and kind of finding that purpose in life. So that was kind of how people were situating that, saying, the competition piece, I want to make sure that I'm being achieving my own goals and bringing those things back to support my community was what people were talking about and my family. So I'll just talk about some cross-cutting themes here just to kind of highlight some key things between the two projects that I shared with you. So there's a few themes that I wanted to reflect on. The first one here, cultural supports, the role that schools are seen to have with reference to supporting student learning about culture and language. So this is a key theme for sure. Schools were seen to definitely have a role in fostering students' cultural identity and pride, and do so by providing students with access to learning about culture and language. And so here are just some quotes that kind of support that. So again, just that idea that cultural supports, having that as part of the school is incredibly significant for kids. And that was across both projects. a person in a place. This came up, honestly, this comes up in almost every project I do over and over again. I hear, I need a person, I need a place, I need a person, I need a place. So this is talking about having a self-identified full-time Indigenous person. So a full-time self-identified Indigenous person at the school, working full-time at each school site. That could be an Indigenous liaison worker, an Indigenous advisor, an elder, a knowledge keeper. So having somebody physically there to actively foster relationships between students and the school, and also families and teachers, facilitating support and understanding and awareness, also among, about Indigenous peoples and cultures and ways of doing among school staff more broadly, but also somebody that they can go to support them individually as well with their own, culture, but that personal connection was significant. And the place, again, something I heard about over and over again, just having a place to go to, a dedicated Indigenous space at schools for cultural programming, ceremonies, really just fostering that sense of inclusion, belonging, and community. And some quotes to support that. And then the last cross-cutting theme I just wanted to highlight is so inviting students to work with teachers as partners to support their education. So this was something I heard over and over again, that students have voices and they want to be heard. And so that idea that, I feel like education often happens to kids and families versus with them. And so kids saying, I have a lot to say, I have lots of opinions, there's lots of things I'd like to see, but I'm not often feeling heard, like I don't feel heard. And so people really appreciating the opportunity to say, come together in a meaningful way to share their voice in a space that was safe and people felt comfortable doing that. So that was something that came across with both projects, the benefit of participating in these projects, but also saying, I'd like to have more of this. So it'd be beneficial for schools to actively seek out and foster opportunities to engage with students and create opportunities for their voices to be heard and their experiences, ideas, and perspectives validated and recognized. And then just key learnings. I know I have to wrap up. I just wanted to highlight the benefits with all my projects. So I said in the abstract that I would talk about kind of doing this work in a meaningful way. The projects I do have all, the projects I'm asked to be part of have just, I'm a community engaged person that's reflective in, the research I do, the service and teaching I do as part of my job. But all the projects I'm involved in have tended to be, and the ones I'm involved in right now, tend to be involving Indigenous students and community members and educators, so around supporting Indigenous students. And so I've just found great value in having, a core project team that, kind of applies for the grants, does the ethics, those kind of things, kind of supports kind of the overall, initial idea of a project. Having, when you start the project, having a broader advisory committee, and then also having community brokers. That's what CBs means, at the participating schools. And so for me, that's been incredibly helpful. And again, this is across all my projects. And the core team having consensus-based decision-making, where people are kind of representing that inner circle, sharing leadership, having engaging in equitable consensus-based approach, decision-making, as I'd mentioned, equitable participation, power sharing. Really, I'm one of several people guiding this work at that center level. Ultimately, we take the responsibility for the projects, but it is definitely in partnership with an advisory committee and community brokers as well. And so with advisory committees, really just bringing a group of people together to provide guidance and feedback on project activities, with each member of the committee contributing their own ideas and perspectives, knowledge and skills and orientations to practice and even knowledge mobilization. Like I had an advisory committee meeting a few weeks ago for a big project I'm doing. And even that in terms of the analysis piece, right? So going out, listening to voices at different schools, coming back, having an advisory committee meeting who has that whole vision of the whole project and saying, these are some things I'm learning, preliminary findings. What do we think about this? And having people kind of share and give broader perspectives and insights related to, am I on track here? Am I learning, or do you want to add different perspectives? Am I not on track? Or do you want to maybe, share some insights that I maybe didn't see or didn't hear in the voices, even though it might have been there, but I may have not observed it myself, right? So just having different people come in with different perspectives and orientations add to that, I find is incredibly valuable working in the projects I do. And then the community brokers, again, going to each school, having a, this is what the project looks like, but how could this unfold in a meaningful way within your specific school? I do that all the time and have, a group of people within each school saying, how could we do this? I think it's funny, I work closely with an elder, and one of the things we thought that kids would all like as a gift for participating is like a nice book. So we thought, we'd pick out these lovely books for the kids. I went to the school and they said, no, the kids would rather have a McDonald's gift card. So I thought, okay, you know best, right? We won't get them the books. So just that idea of having that local on the ground input, I find is incredibly important for doing projects in a respectful, meaningful way. So I know that I'm over time, so I have another slide, but it just talks about how advisory committees are amazing and play an important role. So I will wrap it up. And thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Milne. That was a fascinating presentation. You have so many rich findings, and if anyone here is like me, there are probably lots of questions. So I can imagine you'll probably have a lot of interesting engagement, but thank you for your presentation. So the next presenter, Dr. Gemma Porter, is an assistant professor at St. Thomas University, and the presentation is going to be Policy, Programming, and the TRC, Curricular Reform for Reconciliation. Welcome, Dr. Porter.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Alana. Just want to do a quick check that everybody can hear me okay. I'm guessing that I'll get a flag of some kind if you can't. Okay. Sorry. That's obviously in the way. Perfect. Okay, so thank you, Emily. Wow, our presentations are kind of perfectly aligned. So it's a really good selection of two different presentations that hopefully people attending today will find fit together really nicely. So I'm going to kind of talk about the program development end of things. So a lot of what Emily was talking about is kind of the reason that we developed this program in Lloydminster, and then why we're kind of continuing to work on developing the program even further. So I'm joining you from Fredericton today. It's a miserable day outside, actually. And that means that I'm on Wolastoqey traditional territories. So just take a minute to acknowledge that and be very thankful to be here in this region joining you today. And unfortunately, Denae is really sick right now. She's been sick over the last few days, so she wasn't able to join us. She's really sad. I'm really sad that she's not here either, because she sits at the front of this program and course implementation. So apologies for her not being able to be here, but I'll do my best to do the presentation justice without her this morning. So this just kind of gives you a little idea of what I'll focus on talking about today. So this is a little piece of a quotation that comes from the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. And it's kind of in the section that talks about historical consciousness and sort of thinking about valuing Indigenous historical consciousness as well as Western, and kind of navigating the territory that sort of sits between those in thinking about how we can mend relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians. So where it all starts and where it all ends up for me and Denae in this process is kind of, so I'll take you through these pieces today, but we see this kind of as this constant sort of cycle, thinking about the need for programming that supports Indigenous student success, thinking about how that's connected specifically to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's work and calls to action, as well as decolonization. What research is telling us in terms of implementing policies, practices, programs that support Indigenous students, and then kind of how we're weaving that all together to create programming for students, again, in Lloydminster, Alberta. So if Denae were joining us today, Lloydminster, as some of you might know, is a border town. It sits on the border between Saskatchewan and Alberta. So it too, as Emily mentioned, she was joining from Treaty 6 territory. Lloydminster also sits on Treaty 6 territory. I'll take a second just to mention as well that all the images that are included in the slideshow are images from the program. They're just screen grabs from a YouTube video that we put together highlighting program highlights. So they're all publicly available. And if anyone's interested, I can definitely point you in the direction of that YouTube video as well. So in terms of thinking about the need, this probably isn't any surprise to any of you here today, but there's a long history and continued history of systemic inequity when we think about Indigenous students in the mainstream Western education system. So this gives you the chart that's on the slide here gives you specifically the Saskatchewan context for grad rates for 2019. So you can see that there is still continues to be a disparity between Indigenous and non-Indigenous students' graduation rates. And then what we know from research in terms of what students want. So, helping us to kind of explain why this is the case. They want to learn about cultures, languages, diversity, to have teachers who care about them, and to feel safe and included in the school. So like Emily mentioned, that really hit home with me. It is something that we see come up time and time again over research as well, the place and the person, that essentially students need that space within their education where they feel seen and they feel recognized, and then having those connections with people in the school at the local level on a continuing basis. In terms of thinking about our theoretical frame for developing this program that I'll tell you about today in this course, our frame is really broadly, and I don't have time to go into this today, thinking about decolonization. So it's a really complex and complicated process, but really just to be very simple today, it's sort of about thinking about how we can unsettle and how we can start to kind of destructure some of those pieces that are part of Western education that we know have done harm and continue to do harm to Indigenous students. And that's really connected to the importance of the truth piece for us in truth and reconciliation. So there's tons of research out there, and Emily's doing some of that research right now. So again, that's why it's so great that our presentations fit so well together. But there's lots of research out there around programs and courses that currently exist that have really good implications for Indigenous students that are very supportive programs. And so again, the time today doesn't allow to highlight all of those pieces for you. These are a few of the pieces that we've discovered across research that really speak to what sits at the core of the program that we're developing for the Lloydminster Comprehensive High School, again in Lloydminster. So one is Marie Batiste's work around nourishing the learning spirit. Another piece is the importance and the research support that mentorship and incorporating mentorship opportunities for students is really positive in empowering Indigenous students. Engagements with communities, so thinking about how we can kind of move outside of the four walls of the classroom to engage in community projects. For us, that's specifically thinking about truth and reconciliation, community events, and how we can support those. The valuing of IK, their Indigenous knowledge, so kind of moving away from just the incorporation of content and perspectives, but really thinking about framing coursework and framing programming with Indigenous frameworks. And then on the right here, well, right for me, prioritizing relationships is huge, having culture and language, so opportunities to experience culturally based programming as well as linguistically based programming, and maintaining high expectations for students. So again, as some of you might know, one of the problems essentially with kind of thinking about supporting Indigenous student success is that oftentimes a lot of teachers, educators, even leaders within educational communities have a deficit model of thinking about Indigenous students and kind of just think that Indigenous students can't achieve those high expectations. So the opposite is true. What research suggests that we need to maintain those high expectations for students. In terms of thinking about some of the really high impact pieces that we can put into place to support Indigenous students, again, there's a ton of research out there. This is just one more recent study by the, excuse me, OECD that came out in 2017. This graphic just really briefly shows you a kind of analysis of the lowest cost, highest cost, and then highest impact and kind of medium impact initiatives. So for us, what's really important is that learning activities, engaging families, dedicated rooms, and curriculum really sit kind of on that low cost end, but they can have really, really high impact. And because we have Indigenous leadership leading the program, and Denae is that person. The teaching effectiveness piece is a really core part of this as well. So all of those pieces, again, just kind of highlight, well, we need to be developing programs, continuing to be developing programs and courses that support Indigenous students. So we've kind of taken that research and thought about what we can develop at the local level. So Mentorship 30, as it exists right now in LCHS, is a locally developed course. It's a grade 12 course with that 30 level piece. And the piece around the local content comes from one piece of research in particular that mentions that local content development and delivery is really essential to supporting Indigenous success, but it really needs to be paired, of course, with adequate and appropriate support. So what I'm talking to you about today is a little bit about that Mentorship 30 course as it exists currently and where we're at right now in expanding that program. So for Denae and I, the Indigenous Mentorship Course 30 really speaks to both the goals of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and supporting Indigenous student success. So because the Indigenous Mentorship Program provides students with opportunities to engage in culturally appropriate programming, that kind of really specifically speaks to call to action number 62. In addition to that, in a more holistic sense, the program also provides opportunities for Indigenous students to work with non-Indigenous students to teach them about their culture, about their history, and why it's important within those contexts. So you can see here, this is an image of high school students working with elementary students. So it not only, again, kind of supports those students in the program by exposure to culturally relevant, culturally appropriate content, but it also gives them an opportunity to go out and work with Indigenous as well as non-Indigenous students within the larger school division as well, and sometimes within the community too, outside of schools. So as I mentioned, right now, the course is just offered in that 30 level. So there is no programming outside of that. Where we're at right now with the program development, we just recently pitched a renewal revision of that grade 12 curriculum. And then we are looking at expanding into offering a 10, 20, and 30. So the thinking around that is that we've seen, although we haven't engaged in systematic feedback with our students, we do know kind of just from what we see firsthand in the high school, and this is why I wish Denae was here because she could speak to this much better than I could, but students find value in the program, in the experiences, and having that space within the high school community where they belong, where they can make connections with their culture, where they can connect with elders, where they can connect with other Indigenous students, and where they can also connect with Indigenous teachers as well that are part of the school division. So this is the new frame that we developed that will guide the planning of the locally developed course. So each of the learning outcomes for the 10, 20, and 30 level are organized around using the 4 broad goals represented in this graphic. So this graphic, we feel, successfully weaves traditional ways of knowing and being as they relate to the medicine wheel, together with the Saskatchewan global competencies, broad areas of learning, and cross-curricular competencies. So in a more holistic sense, the program development and design are heavily influenced by Donald's notion of ethical relationality, and you can see how that sits at the center, and as well very much informed by Mary Battiste's conception of nurturing the learning spirit. So I'll just really quickly explain those couple of things for those of you that may be unfamiliar. Ethical relationality really provides a framework for the weaving of diverse perspectives and ways of being in the world. It refers to an ecological understanding of human relationality that embraces difference. Instead of denying difference, this understanding seeks to recognize the different context, through which people experience the world. In this way, it's an ethical approach to thinking about and understanding how our ways of being in the world impact how we're positioned in relation to one another, which of course is key to the project of reconciliation. And then the other piece around nurturing the learning spirit. So Marie Baptiste, as many of you would know, is a dedicated advocate for Indigenous students and Indigenous education in Canada and has been for a very long time. She's long argued for education that not only acknowledges Indigenous identity, culture, and language, but one that also actively nurtures those elements. So Marie's concept of the learning spirit provides a guide for the holistic learning this program really aims to provide. From an Indigenous perspective, learning is much more than an intellectual or purely academic pursuit. Instead, learning is a lifelong process guided by spirit. The spirit comes to us with a purpose and guides us along a path of discovery and inspiration towards fulfilling that purpose. Our program really seeks to acknowledge and nourish the learning spirit so that students are supported in their paths to pursuing their passions and their purpose. Together, these two concepts provide a meaningful framework for developing a program deeply committed to empowering Indigenous youth as well as advancing the goals of reconciliation with students too. And so I'll just take a couple of minutes here to wrap up and kind of think about where we hope to head with this. So like I mentioned, where we're at currently is we've submitted an intent to proceed with the revision of the grade 12 course and then an expansion to include that course at the 10 and the 20 level as well. Those courses have been approved, that intent to proceed and the changes that we're proposing have been accepted at the division level. So now that needs to go through to the provincial level before we can kind of get going on those revisions and get going on that work. We know that we need to shape the course to accentuate the original intent. And again, this is really why I wish that Denae was here. Denae and I have had many conversations about that Mentorship 30 course. And Denae has told me time and again that that course, as it exists on paper, has really lost the heart that she initially intended in developing it. So we really feel that we need to dig in essentially and bring back those elements that were originally intended, centering the Indigenous empowerment piece for students and kind of focusing on those affective pieces of education that we know are so critical in supporting Indigenous student success. So the belonging, the culturally appropriate programming, providing connections with people who care about those students on a continuous basis. So right now with the standalone course at the 30 level, those students only get essentially one semester where they have access to that kind of programming, access to those kinds of connections and that space. So really, because we've seen the positive benefits of this, not only with the students within the high school, but also within schools, within the division that the students go out and engage in mentorship activities with, we know that only good things essentially can come from expanding the program. So yeah, we really think that it'll provide Indigenous youth with the space to learn and grow over multiple courses throughout their time in the school. The renewal and expansion provides Indigenous students at LCHS with culturally based empowering opportunities to impact change within their schools as well as their communities, something that really sits at the heart of reconciliation, we believe, as well. And then on these, on this slide here as well, these are kind of thinking outside of the context of our students within that school, LCHS. We can also think about where we see this project going in the future. Both Denae and I would love to, once we have the full course programming, to dig into actually getting systematic feedback from students so that we can use that to improve the program and also obviously share that research with others. We really feel that this program, some of you might know that once you develop locally developed courses, they become available online for other jurisdictions to use. So we kind of hope that this will become programming that becomes a bit of a template for other schools that are looking for similar programming. And then, of course, we hope too that it has the potential to add to emerging literature on supporting Indigenous students and reconciliation within the school system. And that's it. So I will stop sharing my screen here. Thank you very much for your time listening. I'm really looking forward to the questions that come from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Dr. Porter. That was a really fascinating presentation. that really speaks to decolonizing and what it really means in a practical sense. So now, Dr. Milne and Dr. Porter, for your fantastic presentations. They were really, as you can see, there were lots of questions, lots of interest and engagement. So thank you so much for being our first presenters for 2023. We're starting off the year in really good, in a good way with these presentations. So on behalf of CASE SOE, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank the audience members for attending, and I'd also like to thank the webinar series co-organizers, Kathleen Hillier, Isel Yoon, Danielle Lawrence, Emerson Lacroix, Gus Riveros, and Maria Brisbane. Thank you very much.